Good evening, everyone. I'm Casey Schlottman, the Director of Communications for the APTA Student Assembly, and welcome to tonight's APTA Live event. With National Pride Month now in full swing, we wanted to spend some time talking about the experiences of LGBTQIA plus PTs and PTAs and the challenges they face in trying to fully participate in our profession. Of course, there's a lot we could cover here, but tonight we want to anchor our discussion in two articles published in the March issue of PTJ, Physical Therapy and Rehabilitation. For those of you who may not know, that's APTA's scientific journal, free to all APTA members. The first is an original study titled An Exploration of the Experiences of Physical Therapists Who Identify as LGBTQIA, Navigating Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity in Clinical, Academic, and Professional Roles. The second is an editorial authored by Dr. Gail Jensen titled Time to Shine the Light, which is a commentary on the research piece. I hope you took the time to read these articles before tonight's session, first because they're really good, and second because it would help to sort of round out tonight's discussion. But even if you didn't, no worries. I think you'll get a lot out of our time together anyway. In case you want to check them out, we'll definitely put those links for both articles in the comments. So to get things started tonight, I wanted to introduce our guests and ask them to say a little bit about themselves. So tonight we're honored to have Dr. Janet Bezner, a co-author of the study, and Dr. Gail Jensen, author of the accompanying editorial. So Janet, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Casey. I am the professor and chair of the Department of Physical Therapy at Texas State University in Round Rock, Texas. I've been in academic physical therapy for over 20 years. And I've been a physical therapist for 32 years, going on 32 years. So a long time. My area of practice is health promotion and wellness. I manage our employee wellness program, and I'm also a certified health coach.
All right, thank you so much. And Gail, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, Casey. I guess I can't remember all the years, but I've been around probably longer than Janet. So I'm at Creighton University, where I'm a professor in physical therapy. I also have an administrative title as Vice Provost for Learning and Assessment, and I was the Dean of the Graduate School for 15 years. I would say my clinical background was in orthopedics, but I do most of my work now in education research. I'm very interested in how the profession moves forward with competency-based education, how we develop residency programs, how we continue to grow. And I currently serve on the Ethics and Judicial Committee for APTA. So I'm thrilled to be part of this.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. So let's get started. My first question that I have, first to you, Janet. Could you tell us a little bit about how the study was conducted and what you were hoping to find?
Yes, thanks, Casey. So this was an international study. So there were researchers from the United Kingdom, from Canada, from Australia, and from the US. So westernized countries, but nevertheless global. And we all met at WCPT, or now WP, World Physiotherapy meeting, several meetings ago. And we were just talking about how there's basically not much research on the experience of patients who identify as LGBTQIA plus or physical therapists. And so we were just kind of, chit-chatting over breakfast or lunch one day. And so that led to this study, really. So the lead author, Megan Ross, was doing her dissertation for her PhD, and her supervisors, Jenny Setchell, Dr. Jenny Setchell, both of them are from Australia. And they sort of reached out to all of us, and we all participated. So we recruited physical therapists from across the country, in the US and across the world in their respective countries, who identified as LGBTQIA+. And we interviewed them, basically 60 to 90-minute interviews, to understand what their experiences were as physical therapists. And basically the aim was to document their experience. What are the situations that they encounter, and how do they feel being of the community regarding gender identity and sexual orientation. So we did the interviews, and then did a qualitative and analysis of the data, and that's how we came up with the study results.
Great, thank you. So the study identifies 3 main areas of discourse. So let's talk a little about each one of those. And Gail, please add your thoughts.
Yeah, let me start with a couple of comments. I mean, I received an invitation from the editor-in-chief, Alan Jetty, to write what I consider doing a guest editorial. And I said, wow, this took me a long time, and I felt like it was an obligation. And my first impression of the paper was it was a really good example of qualitative research, which is so important in our profession. And it also had a nice grounding with theory. So you've got these stories, this lived experience in an international frame. So methodologically, it was great. And it also, from my perspective, I used it as an opportunity to reflect on my own journey and lived experience in the profession, and have no problem sharing my authentic self, which I do in the editorial. Been around a long time, so I've got a lot to share, and have no problem sharing it. So.
Perfect. And Janet, if you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think I felt like this was a really important study to participate in, because it sort of confirmed my experience over the past 30 years. I'm in a same-sex relationship and have been for most of my professional career. And while I've felt very accepted by my colleagues in the profession, and have experienced very little, I would say, discrimination or marginalization, I have experienced a lot of that being a physical therapist. So mostly from other colleagues in healthcare who didn't really know me and just made assumptions, and patients. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I've been asked about my husband, I probably would be retired. So it was really, I think personally, really meaningful to me to write this down and to see it come to life, because I could personally really relate to what we heard from the 22 physios or physical therapists that we interviewed.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I have, I start the guest editorial with my own story, and moving from Minnesota and doing my PT education in California. What an opportunity that was for me to be more open and really see my authentic self. And I've been with my partner 38 years, so we're the most stable couple in our book club, that's for sure. But the concepts here, and the normativity, and how important that is, and it pains me. I feel for colleagues and students where there is such a press for the traditional heterosexual thing, and so it's, do you have kids? Do you have, there are always those pressures that cause just a little bit of pause, and it takes a toll on an individual.
So kind of going off of that, the idea of normativity in the workplace. Janet, you wrote that physical therapy marginalizes difference. Can you share what that means and how it surfaced in the study?
Yeah, so what we heard over and over again from the interviewees was that there's a very strong assumption of heteronormity in physical therapy. So everyone we interviewed without fail had stories and examples of that. And so for those participants, they shared that they had to always be on guard, and they talked about the the energy and the attention that it takes to not be sure that you could be yourself and share your story. And they really, this discourse is really about not even having a chance to share their story, because the assumption is just made that if you look like a woman, you're with a man, and if you look like a man, you're with a woman. And some of those men and women didn't even identify as the gender that they apparently look like. And so there were just assumptions made by, not just by patients, although that was true, but by other physios and their bosses and people interviewing them and hiring them. And so it's pervasive, it's pervasive. And I guess that's a little bit shocking, given that I know I teach in a PT program, and Gail has a ton of educational experience. We do a really good job, I think, of teaching our students to accept the patients as they are. And yet we're not offering that to each other. So it is sad, and it's problematic, and it's something for, I think, the profession to think about.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for you, Janet, if this is fair game, right, Casey? Right? Yeah. That having growing up in the Midwest, 12 years in California, lived in the East Coast, lived in the South, and now back in the Midwest, that there is a context, a cultural context that does make it easier or harder. Did you find anything in the study from the countries? It doesn't appear in the paper, but with the interviews, was it different for therapists in Australia and Canada than the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't really look at that, and I think we didn't really look at it because we weren't that didn't come up as a difference. The stories were remarkably similar. Okay. And that was, I guess, what makes this study even stronger, is that it doesn't really matter, at least for westernized countries. The experience was very similar. There would be times when I'd be reading the transcripts and I wouldn't have any idea what country they were from, other than some spelling of a few words, right? Because the experiences were very similar. So, yeah.
Thank you. So next, the article also points to what you call stress and labor as another main area of conversation. So how do you use that term in the study, and what did you find?
Yeah, so the second sort of theme was just the stress and energy it takes to always be deciding, is it okay for me to be and to reveal who I really am? And so, the therapist talked about how when they're young in the profession, gosh, they're so focused on trying to be a good therapist. And Casey, you can relate to this. You're about to start your rotations, and you're going to be so focused on, how do I do that special test, and what questions do I need to ask, and what am I forgetting? And so if you can imagine having all of that in your brain and trying to attend to the needs of the patient emotionally, psychologically, physically, and then having the stress of, what if they ask me a question that I have to decide, am I going to be truthful or not? And so a lot of stress, a lot of added stress to an already stressful profession of being a healthcare provider, especially in today's world. And so that's where that term stress and labor comes from. And it led to this term that one of the participants used, which is doing the safety math, right? So in every situation, weighing the pros and cons, should I tell them who I really am? If they ask me, what does my husband do? Should I say, well, my wife is a blah, blah, blah. And is it safe for me to do that? And if the worst that can happen is that the person gets embarrassed and says, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, tell me about your wife. But what's the worst that can happen? That's the safety math that has to be thought about every time you're in that situation that contributes to that stress and labor.
So what do we do about that? That's, I can, again, my personal story, there is an emotional cost, but there is, I guess, easier to do when you're older. I don't know, to be, I work in a Jesuit Catholic university, and I've always been out with no problem. But there's a risk on the front end. There, you do the kind of, is it psychologically safe to do that? And I guess I'm going to ask a question back to Janet, because can leadership help? Can managers help? How do we set the context? Because I think today's students, students are pretty savvy with language. There's a lot of, you would know this, Casey. What do we do to navigate this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the golden question, the main golden question. I agree with you. Age does help with this. And I think for me, Gail, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but as I've lived in my, with my experience and my situation for, I'm 62 now. I've lived with myself for a long time. I've gotten a lot more comfortable having those conversations. And now I don't even think about it. I just say who I am, and I feel equipped to navigate a difficult conversation in a hard situation. And it wouldn't really take a huge toll on me because I've done it a lot. But listening to some of these younger physios, they don't have that experience, and I didn't have that experience back then. So I made very different choices until I got to a point where I felt like I had, number one, I had nothing to lose. And you can see by my credentials, I probably have nothing to lose. And number two, I just don't really care anymore. But that comes with experience. And the risks for me are much different than the risks for a young person.
Yeah.
So I think having managers and leaders who understand that and respect that and help people learn those skills. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think Casey's generation, they have had those conversations already. And I think they're much more equipped to support a more inclusive, diverse community because they've grown up with it. We didn't grow up with it. So yeah. Casey, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And although I hear you, and I think a lot of, like you said, my generation and my class in particular, who I interact with very often, are very open to hearing these stories. And I haven't heard, from my perspective, of people who are, like you're saying, judgmental of the community. So I feel like we are equipped to really combat this and to really step forward and be the next leaders who are really making it, like you said, more comfortable for everybody to just be themselves and not have to, think about that. Like you said, having to think about everything we already do in the clinic day to day as students and as professionals, adding that stress is not something that should be necessary.
So I'm wondering if there is, because I know on the university, on the academic side, I think there is quite a bit of movement in understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I mean, even at our place, at a Catholic Jesuit school, that across our schools there's an awareness and sensitivity. But in the clinic, I think the focus is on our patient care. So probably, I don't know. I'd be curious, Janet, what you think. Is there more on the universities? Probably have more awareness, I think, and on the clinic side, where our first priority is patient care.
Right. Yeah, we certainly are talking about these topics regularly. I think we're exposing our students. I do see a lag between the academic setting and the clinical setting. So our students, they stay with us for 2 years, and we're a very inclusive environment. I work in a Hispanic serving institution, so we have tons of resources on diversity, equity, inclusion, and it's front and center with everything we do. we do a really good job of attracting students who are minorities into our program, and then making sure they're successful and making sure that they can focus on learning when they're there and not on the fact that they might be Black or brown or gay. And I tell my students this at very first day of orientation: I want you to be able to focus on learning. And if you find yourself distracted because you feel marginalized or discriminated against, I want you to tell me, because I'm going to fix that if I can. And so, but then they go out into the clinic and they're not afforded the same thing. And so we also try to teach them how to have those kinds of conversations with clinical instructors in a way that feels safe to them and that they don't feel like would come back as a bad grade or there might be some situation of retaliation. But, it's the Wild West. As soon as our students walk out the door, who knows what's going to happen? And so there's no guarantee. So I think teaching students how to manage those situations. And then, I think as part of our clinical instructor training from APTA, we could put something on this topic in that training. It would be so appropriate because, if a student who is LGBTQIA plus isn't feeling comfortable with their CI, that's a CI issue. That's a clinical instruction issue. It's a clinical education issue. So to me, that kind of thing fits there, and we should be including that kind of training in all kinds of situations, I think.
Yeah, I think we're aware of patient care, and I think that's part of what your study really uncovers is, look, this goes both ways. Yeah.
Thank you both. So going back to the quote, you mentioned it briefly, the quote of one of your interviewees describing what they call safety math. So if you'd like to elaborate a little bit more on that and how that plays out in the study.
Yeah, so I would say maybe even a quarter to half of the 22 interviewees had a story that they relayed about working with a colleague or a patient, and the patient making an assumption about their gender or their sexual orientation and saying something like your husband or your kids or whatever. And in that moment before you answer, which feels like, an eternity, but is in essence nanoseconds, right? Weighing in your mind, is it okay for me in this moment to answer that question truthfully? Or should I lie, or should I just be vague? Right. So, if I've done this before, somebody asks me about my husband, I say they are a blah, blah, blah. And I don't use a gender. So I'm not really lying, but I'm not challenging or questioning either. And I do that when I feel like that's the best response to get me out of that situation and to make sure that I stay safe. And so that's a constant potential when you're in our community that we all deal with, and some situations are easier to work through than others. You just hope that you make the right decision in that moment.
Yeah, underneath that concept, that comment of safety math is the emotional toll, and we know that in interprofessional, in team-based care and interprofessional education, how important psychological safety is for everyone on the team. And the community in which you practice, the community of practice, is such an important support system for building trust and mutual respect so that you can do your best work. So this is a critical finding.
Yeah. We can't put the patient first when we feel threatened.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a direct affront to patient-centered care, which is one of the most sacred things that we deliver, I think. And so it is I think you're right, Gail, it's a significant threat
Thank you both. So at this time, I'd just like to make a quick announcement. So this is from our nominating committee on the student board. So elections for the student board of directors are coming soon, and we're excited to announce that we have been revamping the board. So it'll look a little different this year than previous years. So a video explaining the application timeline and process is going to be posted to YouTube on June 20th. So definitely keep an eye out for that if you're interested in running. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the nominating committee. You could always reach out to us on social media or by emailing aptasa.ncchair@gmail.com. Just one of the emails, but all of our information is on the social media page as well if you'd like to reach out with any questions regarding that. So we can get back to the questions, and we have a question from the audience. So could either of you speak to how you view differences in academic settings across the country? Because there are clear differences in academic settings still regarding inclusivity of LGBTQ plus folk.
Yeah, I can start with that. Having lived in all sections of the country, there is a difference, I think, in the culture of whether you live in California or you live in DC or you live in the South or you live in the Midwest. And there's also a difference in private and public institutions in terms of regulation. But the most important thing, I would say, has to do with the people, has to do with the faculty. Janet did a beautiful really description of what she does as a leader to make sure that all of her students never feel marginalized or fearful. That's a strong statement coming from a program director and really setting the stage for safety for those students, those learners. So I think you could be in places where there may be differences in the country, and we know that we're challenged in the country right now. And there just are differences where you, just the diversity of where you are, but how important people are in leaders are in different places too. And private and public have different, in private institutions, but I said I'm in a Jesuit Catholic institution or Catholic Jesuit, but I would say the Jesuit values in our mission is we're loyal to the mission, which is about respect for human dignity. So if we really live by that mission, respect for human dignity, that means we respect all humans, which is a core value for any profession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with what Gail has answered, and I would say, I guess for me, I think I was attracted to physical therapy because of my perception that physical therapists were very non-judgmental and accepting of people, right? So real focus on humanity. And I guess a lot of people that go into health professions could probably say something like that for many different health professions. But in physical therapy, I felt that was very true. And what I've learned over the last 10 years, and that was true for I would say the first 20 years of my career. Over the last 10 years, what I've learned is that APTA, physical therapists and APTA, are a microcosm of the country, right? There are physical therapists on all parts of the continuum, of the political continuum. And so my bubble got burst a little bit, I'd have to say, when I realized that over the last 10 years, because we do have some work to do, and I think it doesn't really matter what your political bent is. As a physical therapist, we are supposed to, and we value, respecting everything. So, you don't have to agree that you don't have to live your life in that way, but I think you have to respect that someone else does. And so I think I guess it saddens me to think that we do still have some programs in some academic settings where not everybody is welcome. And that's something that I think students have to be really vigilant about screening when you apply to PT school. I think it's really important that you select an institution that is going to support you for who you are, no matter what you are and who you are. Doesn't matter, but you need to select a place where you can be yourself. I just think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and this core value of respect for human dignity. That one of the things that I teach in the area of ethics with both PT students and medical students, and our personal values can be one thing, but our professional core values are central. We share those, so generally they become more congruent, or they're congruent from the start. But if they're not, you have to. Your professional core values are extremely important, because that's the promise, the oath you make to society. That is your obligation to fully being a professional. And those go back, and when Dolly Swisher's Macmillan comes out, she really spoke deeply about that, as well as the Sarah Soley that she published in the Journal of PT Education.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So moving to the next question. So Janet, when analyses like these are done, there can be a tendency for people to think, well, that's not me. I treat everyone fairly, consistently. So how do you hope the physical therapy profession responds to this study collectively and as individuals?
That's a really, really great question, Casey. So I think it is incumbent on every individual and the profession to do this work. Every one of us, no matter who we are or what our background is, we need to ask ourselves these hard questions, right? How am I, or how could I be, would be a fine question too. How am I, or how could I be marginalizing other people? I think this kind of work requires some really sincere and deep soul searching, and self-evaluation, self-assessment. So, what might I be doing to make other people have to do safety math? Vow to change that. And you're going to make mistakes. So saying, "Oh, shoot, I did that again. I'm sorry. I'm really trying to work on that." Practicing. So if everyone did that, it would make an enormous difference, in my opinion. And then the profession, I do think the profession has an obligation to shine a light on these issues, to work internally to clean up what we do, and then work out into the world and society and contribute to making society a more inclusive and diverse and safe place for people. So to me, that's our social obligation, and we have the tools, the abilities to do it. It just takes prioritization and time. We just now have research now that shows that it is a problem. So the question now is what and when and how are we going to address it?
Yeah, I think Janet said it very well. I think implicit bias training is a very helpful tool. We all have a bias of some sort, and I think it brings that to light. The other thing I think is important is to feel safe to ask questions. Language is very powerful. So when you see something that's disrespectful or hear something that's disrespectful, to say nothing, that's what we call being complicit. That actually is an action. So there are ways to ask questions that can be very tactful, and then a forgiveness of you can make mistakes. I mean, that's got to be part of what's in the community. But that comes through role modeling, which we know is extremely powerful in any work setting. So you're going to do that, right, Casey?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit more about calling people out. There's one thing about physical therapists that I think is universal, with a few exceptions, and that is that we don't like conflict, and we don't like hurting people's feelings. And so and I say that with all love and respect for our profession, but it doesn't help us in certain situations. And this is one of those, because we're not good at holding each other accountable. So when you see somebody say or do something, it isn't okay to just let it go. I mean, it's not necessary to embarrass them and do it in front of everybody, but to just take them aside and say, I interpreted what you said as this, and if I did, probably the person you were directing it to did, and that probably didn't land very well with them. So it's something maybe for you to think about, how you could say that in a different way. And I know you didn't mean it that way, but it still has a negative effect. So we have to learn how to become more comfortable with these kinds of difficult conversations. That's how you change culture. And I think culture is all of these discourses that we identified in our paper. They're rooted in the culture of physical therapy. And those of us who are physical therapists, which are all of these people right here, we create our culture. So it's up to us to really do something to make it better. And I've seen cultural transformation. I've been a part of it. I would say I'm in the middle of doing that now where I work, and I know it can happen, and I know it's powerful. It takes vigilance, and it takes commitment, and it takes intentionality to do that. So we have to be intentional.
Absolutely, I agree. Something very simple, but I always say it, is to just put yourself in their shoes. I try to do that as much as I can, and I think that makes a huge difference. Okay, so the next question I have for you is, the conversations you described in your article are almost all conversations around workplace and professional culture, and changing culture and perception isn't the same as changing policies or protocols. In fact, in some ways, it's a much more daunting task. So where do we start?
That's a tough question. They say culture eats strategy for lunch or breakfast on a daily basis. The business folks are fond of saying that. It's pretty powerful.
It is. That's one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah. I think you should take the question first, Janet.
Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned professionalism, Casey. So the third discourse, the third theme that we found was this whole notion of professionalism. So the LGBTQIA plus interviewees that were in our study, they really felt like, in order to be who they were, authentically, to bring their authentic self, would be viewed as unprofessional. And that was the most fascinating of all of what we found to me, because there's this very narrow, might I say, Western white definition of professionalism, right? And it has to do with maybe more so how you look, how you dress, than what you sort of who you love, or what you might say, or how you might do your work. And so that, I think, is something for the profession to grapple with. And we're grappling with it in my institution, because I forced the issue this year with my colleagues, because I was noticing that our students seem to have a different notion of professionalism than we did, we the faculty. And so we broke up in groups. Each of the students got together and talked about what professionalism meant to them. The faculty did it. We each created a word cloud, and we got together in a mixed group with all the cohorts and the faculty, and we talked about the differences between our word clouds. And it raised these really fascinating issues. Like, our female students thought, this cracks me up, really. The female students thought, the female faculty are going to judge me if I don't come with makeup on and my hair done every day to class.
That's Texas.
Well, it might be, Gail. I mean, that's a good point. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm one of your faculty and you think that? That's crazy. Like, I don't wear makeup every day. And so they just had these perceptions. And so I think the notion, I'd love to hear what Gail has to say about this, and I want to definitely hear what Casey has to say about this, but this notion of professionalism is changing as our world changes, and we've got to allow it to change. And the profession, I think, has to grapple with that, because what's going to happen, Casey, is if I'm your CI and I'm 40 years older than you, and my notion of professionalism is grounded in my generation and yours, I'm going to look at you one day and the 8 weeks you're with me, and I'm going to say, that's unprofessional. And it's probably not. but the way I grew up, maybe it is, but the way you conduct yourself, it's not. And so I think it's leading to this misunderstanding, which really, again, marginalizes and alienates people. So I kind of got off track, but I think one of the things that I would like for us to do is to really think about professionalism and what does that mean, and how we can use that term appropriately so it does not marginalize and discriminate against people.
Well, there's a lot there, Janet. The first thing that comes to my mind is that I remember in my doctoral study, Nell Noddings, who was very well known for writing about the centrality of care and caring, which was picked up by the nursing profession. But she asked me, is physical therapy is predominantly a female profession? You have more than 50% women. So what is the role of caring in your profession? And her point was, professions can't just be defined as male-dominated white kind of standards. And historically, that's what has happened. That's been the template upon which we judge or assess whether that. And I think our notion of profession has to be, if we're going to be taking care of the diverse needs of society, we've got to change. Now, I've also been, I'm just back from Florida at Brooks Rehab, where we had there was a symposium for residency and fellowship education, and we had Nicole Piamonte, who's a medical humanities person, and she talked about it should be less about professionalism and what are we doing in that professional identity and formation. That it's not about wearing a white coat, right? It's not that. It's about who your way of being, which is an ongoing process. You have to know and do, and you have to be habits of head and hand and heart. So it's this sense of being, and what does that mean in terms of our identity and our obligation? And that's got to be somewhat dynamic too. So it's not easy. So Casey, what do you think about all this?
I agree with what both of you had to say. I think that in my case in particular, with my education so far, there has been a huge, our professionalism has been huge. But like you said, the definition of what professionalism truly means, I think is still a little skewed, just because a lot of what we're told about professionalism is how you dress, how your hair looks, how, what kind of shoes are you wearing, how it's not your empathy and how you're building yourself, your character, like you mentioned, and how you're, continuing on the course to become a professional. So I think that needs to change and to be talked about more, and how that could make more of an impact than the clothes that you're wearing. Something as simple as how you are developing as a student and a future clinician should be the top of the conversation of professionalism.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just sitting here imagining how much of an impact would that have on this topic we're discussing. Mm-hmm. It could be huge, because people would see each other for who they are, and not be distracted by those other things. We have students who are from very, very limited socioeconomic backgrounds, and we have a dress code when we have a guest lecturer from outside, or we take them somewhere they have to dress in a our school polo and a pair of slacks. And some of them can't afford to buy those things. And yet when they don't come dressed like that, we call them unprofessional, or we give them a negative mark for professionalism. And so we're not really seeing them for who they are. And they're going to make the best therapists that we could possibly put out there. If we can get past this silly little notion that is in the way. Yeah. So I think you're making a great point, Casey.
And do you think that if you understand what it means to demonstrate respect and mutual respect, then these things happen, these other things come along. The most important thing is, as you said, Casey, that your sense of character and who you are in your identity it's not someone telling you you've got to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you actively get to know somebody and you know their character, then all of the external, what you see, doesn't have anything to do with how you perceive that person.
Yeah, one thing that you both said, and Janet, you said it before, 15 years ago, maybe it was 20 years ago, we did a study on expert practice in physical therapy. And one of our findings was that our expert master clinician, expert practitioners were non-judgmental. We called them moral. They had a sense of moral agency. So they withheld judgment. They didn't label patients. They didn't say that's a poor historian. They were non-judgmental, which is easy. It's not easy to do, but it's so important. And it certainly relates to your findings, Janet, in this.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. I mean, we teach students that, and we say in our program, when you can't love someone when you're judging them, which I think is really true. But in terms of a patient, we talk a lot about when you're treating a patient that has a characteristic that is very, very counter to maybe one of your beliefs, and how can you set that aside and give them, the kind of care that they deserve. And so we do that, but we don't do that for each other. What about colleagues?
Yeah.
Right? Colleagues deserve the same.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter after all.
Definitely. Yeah. So at this point, though, that was my last question, but I would like to open it up at this point to each of you, and anything you'd like to add. Very thankful that you both are here. And if you'd like to add anything else to the conversation, as well as any of your contact information, if anybody has any questions, if you'd like to share that, please. Janet, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Casey. Well, I just want to say first, thank you for asking us to come talk about this topic, and providing some airtime for it. I really appreciate that, and appreciate being able to be involved. I would just say there are lots of resources now for people who are interested in becoming a more inclusive, non-judgmental type colleague, friend, therapist. So I would say, avail yourself of those resources. Almost every institution has those kinds of resources, but they don't walk up to you and knock on your forehead and tell you to use them. You mostly have to seek them out. So seek them out. Be open to perhaps your mind being changed about something. And I think from my own personal experience, I've never regretted going down one of those scary roads, because I learned something more about myself or someone else that was valuable. So And I'd be happy to be a resource for anyone about those kinds of things. What's the best way to share our emails, Casey?
Yeah, we only had 50 characters in the. I guess we get. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you'd like to put them in the chat, or if you'd like, I can share it in the comments too. So if you go ahead and put it in the chat, I can share it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I would echo what Janet said there. I think the health professions actually have done quite a bit. Medical education's done a lot. The Josiah Macy Foundation, I cited that in the guest editorial. They have a really robust. They had a symposium, and it's very well done. And the AAMC has lots of resources out there as well, and we have ours as well. We've got people doing work in this area. But I would say that I think, and I say this about a lot of things in physical therapy, the need for continued professional development, faculty development, whether we seek it out within our institutions. This isn't easy stuff for everybody. I get that, and so we're always learning. And to me, that's at the heart of it. We're always continuing to grow and learn, so that we can take good care of each other. Because if we take good care of each other, we can take good care of our patients and the communities in which we live. And this is great. I can't imagine this happening 40 years ago in my lifetime, right? It may be in California,
Well, thank you both again so much for joining me tonight. This was a great conversation. And thank you for our viewers, anyone who tuned in, and this will be recorded. So anybody who's watching, thank you. If you'd like to read the articles we discussed tonight, the links have been posted in the comments, or you can just visit the PTJ website and locate the March 2022 issue. And as I said, all PTJ content is available for free to APTA members. And also, if you'd like to check out APTA's DEI-related resources and information, visit the apta.org/DEI. So thank you both again. And my name is Casey Schlottman. Thank you for watching.
Thanks.